I want to thank you, and I also want to thank all the amazing people on the LACP team, including Kevin Weinstein, who's now behind the scenes, holding our Zoom with his bare hands, Brandon Gannon, our Director of Operations and Education, Matthew Finley, and Jason Woolfolk. And I want to thank our Board of Directors and our Board of Advisors who support, help us carry out this work and make these things happen in the world. And as Janice was mentioning, our members are such an important component of our community. So I want to thank each and every one of you as well. And also have to say thank you to the amazing artists that have submitted their work and shared their practice with us in the scope of this exhibition. As you all may be aware, this exhibition explores mixed media and experimental photography, seeking to highlight some of the ways in which photographers now think about the material presence of the photographic image and how it responds to or participates in other fields of visual practice. What does it mean to think about the tactile presence of images? And can we think about two-dimensional images as three-dimensional objects? Especially now, I think, when we're immersed in conversations about technology, AI, and photography, it felt particularly relevant to look at how photography finds its path in relation to craft, sculpture, conceptual practices, and how all of these different areas of practice connect through storytelling and through diverse approaches toward narrative and sequencing. And I have to say that by the responses that we received to our open call, we know that many photographers are also interested in these questions. And we're looking into further deepening the conversation about this as well. So tonight, you will hear from some of the participating artists, and we will see all the works that are included in the show. And if you are in LA, I invite you to visit our downtown LA gallery to see another part of this project, which is a curated exhibition that we organize under the heading of Expand and Contract. And it includes works by our winner that you're going to hear from tonight, and a cadre of fascinating artists from across the US and across the globe. It's our international group exhibition, the first one that we've organized in our downtown LA gallery. Also, stay tuned because we're going to host an artist panel on May 11 at our space at 11 a.m. So save the date, and more information about that will follow. So now I would like to switch gears a little bit, and we'll start with looking through the works that were accepted into this virtual exhibition through the open call. And then we're going to get to hear from some of the artists. So let's take a look at all the works on view. So much exciting work. I think you can all see the breadth and the depth of the various areas of practice and how all of the participating artists really stretch and redefine the limits and boundaries of this practice. So now, what I would like to do is to invite our artists to talk about their work. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to hear from artist, each artist that participates tonight, 4 artists in total. We're going to hear them talk about their work, and we will then come together for Q&A. And please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A section, and we will keep track, and I will make sure to also present those questions to the artists as well. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Bootsy Holler to talk about her work. Hi, Bootsy.
Hi.
So we're going to hear from Bootsy, and please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank Rotem and everyone at LACP for inviting me to speak on this personal project of mine, and everyone that's come to enjoy and listen. Really appreciate it. This is Contaminated, Government Fallout. This is a series about a secret place where my family lived and worked from the 1940s to the 1990s, and also where I grew up. So as you saw earlier, this is the piece that was chosen. I just wanted to flash it up there. Okay, so I'm going to rally through the first half of this because it's a lot of just explaining so you can understand why I created the work. Contaminated is a layered historical exploration of the people affected by the secrets that the United States government kept during the Manhattan Project, their subsequent illnesses, and the polluted land at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation where the plutonium was processed. If you watched Oppenheimer, you might have a bit of knowledge of what I'm about to talk about. This is the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in 1940, where the B reactor was located in Washington State. B reactor produced the first plutonium used for warfare. I grew up 35 miles from Hanford and Richland, the closest town. Here's a quick map to show you the site location. Detailed on the left, the outer red lines on the map show the 625 square miles occupied by the US government in 1942. The red blocks are the processing buildings and reactors created between 1943 and 1945. So all the ones on the river, except for that super lower bottom one, are reactors. And then the one just below the three on the river is also a reactor, and the other buildings are processing plants. Inside the B reactor, uranium is processed with the help of fuel rods to convert it into plutonium. I'm not going to get into fission and everything tonight because I don't have enough time, but I'm just giving you the down and dirty. Water cools down these rods before they pass through another chemical system that retrieves the plutonium. So in this image, what you're seeing is where all the rods are slid in, and water from the Columbia River is cooling the rods as they get hot. And that's where you see all that steam in that photograph. The process generates large amounts of chemical waste, contaminated water, and high-level radioactive sludge for a very small amount of usable plutonium. How small? This is a diagram of the Fat Man bomb, which was dropped on Nagasaki, Japan. The pit inside the bomb was about the size of a softball and weighed close to 14 pounds. The result was about 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds of material fission. Hanford has different processes for different types of waste. Slightly contaminated liquids are stored in ponds. There's solid waste is buried on here on the left. Those are big containers of solid waste. And some gases are released into the air. Across the reservation are approximately 1,600 waste sites, currently holding approximately 25 million cubic feet of solid radioactive waste buried in trenches and tunnels. And you can see on the right, that's a fuselage from a reactor that it died. So they're having it's called a burial. And you could see there's a man, so you can see how deep that hole is. The Hanford reactors decommissioned at the end of the Cold War in 1990. Years of weapons production had left behind 53 million gallons of high-level radioactive waste. To this day, the Hanford site contains 2/3 of the United States radioactive waste and is the country's most extensive environmental cleanup to date. So this is what the reactors look like now. They're cocooned in 8 feet of cement with, in every language, saying, "Do not open." This brings us up to 2014 when I shot this image or these images. You're looking at the cocooned reactors. There's 9 in total across the river, the Columbia River, and Saddle Mountains in the background. So this is just a little more information about the land out there. Man has not changed this geographic area since the last ice age over 10,000 years ago. The Columbia River has the last 50 miles of wild river in the lower United States. Because the government owns this land, a dam that was planned to be built there was never installed at this location. Yes, this land is undeniably polluted, yet the land of Hanford includes vast, continuous tracts of healthy, untouched, arid lands with many mammals, birds, and insects roaming about. In modern reality, it's hard to find nature that remains untouched by humans. So it's definitely an interesting area. Remember how I was talking about all the nuclear waste? The US government kept such poor records regarding what was done and what was not done to protect employees that the US Department of Labor now has the Energy Employees Occupational Illness Compensation Program Act, which started in 2001. This plan now compensates employees who have illnesses related to exposure to radioactive and toxic substances. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in 1941 when radioactive iodine was released into the air. So this is the first piece. Here's my first idea for representing an illness. I had the idea to burn through a photo of my paternal grandfather. He was a chemist at the Hanford site. He had thyroid and stomach cancer, both of which are on the list for the Compensation Act. Many years after his death, when the act actually became available after he died, my sister and I encouraged my dad to apply for survivor benefits. So my father and his sister were compensated in a lump sum payment of $150,000 for my grandfather's illnesses, which were caused by working in the area. So this is just kind of a more of a detail to get you to be able to see and understand the work. The layers represent all the secrets and people affected by working at the Hanford site, and also all the layers of pollution in the environment and underground. So I've named this style of work I'm doing as stacking. It gives the image more integrity and turns it into a handmade sculpture. And these are smaller, as you can see, I'm holding it in my hand. As a toddler, my mother came to Richland, the closest town to Hanford. Her father, my grandpa Willie, was one of the first men to survey the land that would become the Hanford plant. My mother had 2 total mastectomies soon after she turned 50. And because she was living in Richland her whole life and also worked out at Battelle Labs for many years, which was out in the area, as we called it, she too qualified for compensation of $150,000 for breast cancer. So these are a little bit smaller, and I made like 20 of them. And the last time I showed them, I had them in these little boxes, and then I had this added vinyl. This was at Photo London 2023. So I designed a newspaper because it's such a complicated piece that when I show it, I want to be able to, people can just kind of walk off with a little newspaper if they want. So this is the front page of the Richland Villager paper, August 6, 1945, the day that the locals working at the Hanford site realized what they had been involved with. Fat Man, which was dropped on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. This decision was taken in response to Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. So just to like back up and think about how fast they produced that bomb from 1941 to 1945 with something that had never been done before. So during World War II, Germany, Italy, and Japan, all led by fascist leaders, formed the Tripartite Pact. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States declared war on Japan. This development of a nuclear bomb was accelerated to try and catch up to the Germans, who were believed to be ahead of us in developing nuclear superpowers. This is just an example to show you how I showed it one time at the Foley Gallery in New York. I just had a single wall in a group show. And so this was how I displayed it. The larger image in the background depicts the Columbia River image you saw earlier. And it's about 24 by 72 inches. The back image of the Columbia River reach are vinyl, and the top piece is acrylic. And the acrylic represents the vitrification process that aims to contain the waste in glass. This is something they've been working on for the last 30 years out at Hanford to prevent the future leaks into the ground from the barrels. This is my father. He was an assistant manager for the safety operations at Hanford during the 1980s. Many of the papers he remembers keeping classified were likely evidence of the nuclear testing events that led to his own father's stomach and thyroid cancer. Wanda is a friend of the family. She became sick and qualified for compensation of $150,000. Plutonium-239 looks unnatural. It's bright fluorescent green, and it poses radioactive danger to anyone working with it or living in the region. Its effects are slow and silent. The line of green here represents the depth of damage that this chemical has caused by seeping into the ground, the water, and the people's bodies over the years. This is Julia. She's representing one of my dad's best friends, Chet. Chet died of brain cancer. He was a brilliant engineer. His wife was able to apply for survivor benefits and was able to get reimbursement for some of the doctor and hospital bills they paid. So she received $300,000 in total. I think that's the max you can get if you weren't someone who worked with beryllium, which stepped it up a notch. I cut this out by hand, which was extremely hard, but I now have a laser cutter to help me. So I started producing some bigger pieces because the paper ones, they just don't really want to upscale the same way. So this is Lou and Dusty Rhodes, my grandparents. This image represents my grandfather's stomach ulcers after working at Hanford for 10 years. They were so bad that he stopped work and left the area, but returned in the mid-60s because of my father and aunt were living in Richland with us kids. Cancer never affects just one person. This was the first piece I created on the laser cutter. The images are mounted on mat boards and stacked with each image. I've placed spacers between them to help with the stacking. I'm able to create larger pieces with the boards and laser cutter. Yeah, because this one's like 12 by 12, 12 and a half by 12 and a half. My mom's mom, she passed away in 1978, very early. She was very sick most of my life, and we were never quite sure where her cancer started. But the thought was it started in her uterus, and then it made its way up into her liver. I can still remember the color of her skin in the open casket. I made this piece for all the women. This is my aunt, my dad's sister. If I remember correctly, she worked at the Federal Building and Human Resources. She applied for Energy Employee Occupational Illness Compensation after getting lung cancer, but she didn't qualify because she had smoked cigarettes. She passed away in 2016. And this is the last one I've been working on. It's still, I'm still working on this project, and this one's kind of, I'm in the middle of it. John was a brilliant geoscientist who researched the movement of radioactive particles through groundwater under Hanford. He worked for Battelle Northwest Labs and received top honors in science for both Battelle and Department of Energy. John was about 15 years younger than my father, and I see him as another wave of workers now focused on cleanup that will unfortunately fall ill. John passed away in 2021 from a rare form of leukemia. I met John when he married my best friend from high school. He was a friendly, talkative, athletic person in super good shape who loved climbing mountains. John's wife got survivor benefits from the Energy Occupation Act. This piece is much larger than all the others, and I'm having to hand cut the pieces. It's still a work in progress. This is 42 by 24. And then that's pretty much it. I just threw that up at the end. That's me in Photo London, and I had photographed the sculptures and printed them larger just to kind of have a larger impact. And then I have a whole second series called Declassified, which is all the land out there. So the two projects actually merge together. That's why there's that picture of the flowers. So, okay.
Thank you, Bootsy. Thank you so much. So many questions about the work. Thank you for sharing everything with us, and for also giving us the sneak peek into the work in progress. That's kind of amazing to be able to see all of that. So we'll come back to you later on in our Q&A session. I would now like to introduce you all to our third place prize winner, Brian Van Camerik, for Homosocial. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
Hi. I would like to hand it over to you now, and I'll see you in a few moments.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Van Camerik, and I'm the organizer and principal artist of Homosocial. I created the reliquary on the left and the portrait miniature on the right that are in LACP's Expand and Contract virtual and in-person exhibitions. First, let me give a little context for these artworks. These artworks were created for my project Homosocial. Homosocial is a contemporary project that celebrates queerness in the past and present. One facet of Homosocial is my project is to collect found vernacular photographs of homosocial couples and enshrine them in reliquaries. More about that in a bit. Homosocial is also a process of creating unique images that reference art history. But what is homosocial? What does the term homosocial mean, you may ask? And how does that term relate to my project? Homosocial is a term borrowed from academia that means two people of the same gender interacting in an intimate way. It does not necessarily mean homosexual. It is a more expansive and nuanced term that connotes queerness, but doesn't name it explicitly. For example, movies with homosocial overtones are like Thelma and Louise and Fight Club. These movies aren't about homosexuals per se, but they document the interaction between two people of the same gender. So like that, these vintage photographs that I collect from the 19th and 20th century demonstrate a similar type of interaction between two people of the same gender. And so while I can't say the people depicted in these photographs are homosexual, I can easily say they're homosocial. I find these images stirring because they exhibit a queer sensibility in which I see myself and others like me. This stirring is the conceptual thrust that fuels me to create reliquaries. I create them to house and reframe the way we look at the vintage homosocial photography. Here are some views of the carousel reliquary in the virtual exhibition. The top portion of this reliquary in an LACP show spins slowly around to view 4 portraits of homosocial couples hugging each other and embracing. So you can see them there. And hopefully here's a video of it spinning. I'll just play it for a little second and give you kind of an idea of how the reliquary works. As you may have noticed, I use this term reliquary. Please let me explain. Reliquaries are specially designed, highly decorated containers that enshrine and protect sacred objects. Here are some examples here. They protect sacred objects, and they're inside the reliquaries are called relics, hence reliquary. On the slide on the left is a reliquary with the skull of a saint inside it, and on the right here is another reliquary for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They're both very decorative and very, very beautiful. Reliquaries are prevalent in Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, and some Christian religions, especially Roman Catholicism. While there are reliquaries that hold parts of Prophet Muhammad's beard, teeth of the Buddha, and clothes of the saints. So for instance, these reliquaries I've made in the past 2 years borrow heavily from European and specifically Christian medieval architecture. I model some of the reliquaries after churches, cathedrals, and other religious buildings I've seen in person or found online. Some are directly inspired from real-life references, such as the Westminster Abbey in London on the left, and the reliquary I made on the right. So for instance, I'll take specific elements of the Abbey in Westminster, such as the tower with a clock on the left and a tower with a circle face on the right, and use a pocket watch for the clock and place photographs of lilies within the empty circle face. This is the close-up of that same reliquary. And so for instance, I modeled this reliquary after the Sainte-Chapelle Cathedral in Paris. This reliquary is derived from a real-life building, but I Christianize it by introducing Gothic windows and arches. And those are pocket watches at the top of the reliquary, like similar to the other reliquary before. But essentially, with this facet of homosocial, I combine 2 traditionally adversarial communities, Christians and LGBTQ+ people, into harmonious forms that demonstrate the permanence of homosocial people in history, especially their relationship with the early Christian church and Christianity. With my queer reliquaries, I hope to demonstrate that it is possible for homosociality and religiousness to coexist together in the present. My reliquaries envision a future in which all people can appreciate and embrace the beauty of homosocial relationships. So that's the reliquaries, and this is this other piece that's in the expanded contract show is another venture of Homosocial, and it's the development of recreated portrait miniatures. So I'll give a little background on portrait miniatures. So like the historical nature of a reliquary, I'm interested in portrait miniatures, which are miniature paintings inset within little golden frames. Here are a few examples of portrait miniatures from 16th century England. Nicholas Hilliard is the artist of these miniatures, and he painted many portraits of Queen Elizabeth. These paintings are so tiny, they're no more than a few inches high, and painted on vellum or ivory, they're like little jewels in themselves. They're really lovely. These portrait miniatures were painted, these two here were painted by the masterful artist Isaac Oliver. So I adore these portrait miniatures so much that I wanted to recreate them in terms of subject matter, composition, costuming, but with a queer sensibility and modern photography. This is the portrait miniature selected for Expand and Contract, called Portrait Miniature of Helping Out a Queer. But this composition is lifted from a 16th century Hilliard portrait miniature called Unknown Men Clasping a Hand from the Clouds. I purposely copied this painting because I was struck by the elegance of the composition and the sentiment. I wanted to recreate Hilliard's composition, but with my queer self getting help from the clouds above. And although the man and hand being held in Hilliard's portrait is unknown, I can easily say that the hand I hold in my queer portrait is my sister's. My sister, Kristen Papik, is an extraordinary woman, and I wouldn't be who I am today without her in my life. It only felt natural that it should be her hand that I hold. And so this portrait miniature is one of many portrait miniatures I created. And most of them, I hold objects whose alternate definitions are either gay slurs or euphemisms for various body parts that gay men enjoy. In these portrait miniatures, I hold a pansy, a cigarette or fag. And the last one, I hold a peach. I'll let you guess what part of the body that represents for men. You can see more of my pieces on Homosocial's website, www.homosocial.xyz. And just as a side note, this is, I've not edited or composited these photographs at all. This is an image of the setup for the portrait miniatures. They're all photographed in one shot with a camera, shower curtain, life-size frame, and myself in a lavender backdrop. But thank you for listening to me speak about my work in the Expand and Contract exhibition. It's a pleasure to speak before you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much. And it is such a wonderful way to close this, to look at the set and everything that's been happening behind the scenes. So thank you. And I would now like to introduce our second place prize winner, Asiya al-Sharabi. Hi, Asiya.
Hi, how are you? Let me share my. Thank you. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to LACP and Dr. Rotem for creating such a wonderful exhibition. It's truly an honor to be here, and congratulations to all artists. Okay, so these are the images that were selected for the exhibition. They are part of a series titled My Mother's Tender Script, which is still in progress. And I'll be sharing some behind the scenes moments, including events where I encountered challenges while creating. However, I'll take you through the creative journey along with the final works. But first, let me share a bit about my mother and what really inspired me to dive into this project. Losing her was very tough for me. Yet, what truly amazed me was her immense strength and inspiration. Despite facing illiteracy and navigating through a tough life in a challenging country like Yemen, she always found a way to stay strong, whether it was in her society, within her family, or in her marriage to my dad, despite the age and education gap between them. In the wake of her passing, I found comfort in her handwritten notes, starting a deeply personal journey. Bringing life back into my creativity became a healing experience. With each stroke and delicate touch of light-sensitive chemicals, reconnecting me not only with her, but also with my artistic essence. As I was going through her belongings after she passed, there were items that really caught my eye. 2 photos of her from the late 70s and her phone notebooks. My mother had such a tough start in life, married off at just 11, widowed at 15, and then remarried my dad at 17. Her story was one of constant struggle, and early responsibilities. But despite never having a formal education, she continued to practice writing and drawing in her phone notebooks throughout her life, right up until her final day. My father, on the other hand, lived a life worlds apart from hers. He was an educated writer and journalist, traveling the globe and attending literary events. It was like they were living in completely different worlds. But my mother longed for a connection, a meeting point between their two worlds. That's where her phone notebook came in. It was her personal treasure trove of contacts and thoughts where she could express herself and bridge the gap between their lives. It was her way of seeking connection in a world that often seemed to keep her at arm's length. Despite the challenges she faced, she remained determined in her quest for self-expression. She adorned herself in fashionable attire, and whenever she joined my father on his travels, she made a point of visiting studios to have her photograph taken. She would also enlist my father and friends to capture her image, ensuring that her presence was documented and her voice heard in their shared moments. Despite her illiteracy, she had a remarkable memory. Living with her, I witnessed her routine of returning home with her bag filled with small scraps of paper, each bearing the names and phone numbers of various individuals she had encountered or intended to reach out in the future. With meticulous care, she would transcribe these new contacts into her phone notebook and seek assistance with saying them aloud to etch them into her memory. Even when I attempted to assist by writing down the details, she would often overwrite my entries, ensuring she could photograph them with her eyes and commit the letters to memory. Bear in mind that this was in the early 80s, a time when mobile phones were non-existent back then in Yemen. Over time, we grew reliant on her phone notebooks for everything from contacting neighbors, friends, and family to essential services like pharmacies, groceries, taxis, and TV channel episodes along with their airtimes. Okay, so let's delve into my mother's tender script and how I brought it to life. I have always enjoyed experimenting with different techniques in my photography, but for this project, I wanted something hands-on, something that would truly challenge me and allow my creativity to flow. I aimed to capture the strength and resilience of my mother, much like how she expressed herself through her writings, despite facing numerous challenges. So I asked myself, how can I use my art and heart to honor her memory, amplify her voice, and give her the recognition she deserves? That's when I decided to revisit a technique I was introduced to years ago through a workshop organized by the French Cultural Center in Yemen. It was a long journey of trial and error, a self-taught process of elimination. However, I was determined to uncover its secrets. Along the way, there were stations in which I failed, and I was not satisfied with the results. Despite facing setbacks and continuous failures, excuse me, I decided to give it another try with my mother's series. And after years of hard work, I was about to stop and just lose hope. However, it was on this day that my final attempt with this picture succeeded. What's most remarkable is that this journey not only revealed the original technique, but also led to the discovery of additional skills and techniques. In the process, I transformed the photos from my mother's archive into enlarged digital negatives or positive, utilizing both options. I then seamlessly infused her delicate drawings and writings from the phone notebooks before employing the Resino pigment type technique, merging painting, printmaking, and photography into a single process. This involved various stages, including chemical preparation, paper sensitizing, exposing, washing, powdering dry pigment over the surface, and retouching with a soft brush. It was both exhausting and rewarding. Through this technique, I aimed not only to create art, but also to honor my mother's memory and shed light on the struggles of illiteracy that many women in Yemen still face today. It's my small way of making a big statement. Thank you for listening, and now I will leave you with a slideshow featuring some of the final works from the series. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wonderful to see the process in this way as well. And we'll come back to Asiya in a few more moments. I would now like to introduce the work of our first place prize winner, Pamela Beck. And we're gonna see a little bit of her work and hear about her process as well.
I'm sorry I can't be there today in person. I'll be arriving in Portugal right about now. Instead, I've prepared a short video presentation to give you an idea about my practice. I'm so grateful to Los Angeles Center of Photography for recognizing my images, glass houses, and time travel. Congratulations to all of the artists in our LACP community. Thank you. I didn't set out to be a photographer. I'm a storyteller, a novelist by profession, and completely intimidated by camera technology. Maybe it's because I'm a bit dyslexic and very ADD. Following directions is not something I've ever been good at. Instead, I'm guided by ideas, experimentation, a vision that develops in my mind and drives me to distraction until I realize it. I've been collecting fashion photography and contemporary art since I was in my 20s. After years of looking for a piece for a particular wall that I wanted to fill, I finally saw in my mind what I wanted, and I decided to make it. I've always worked by instinct. The vision I had in my head took me down a kind of magical rabbit hole where I began playing with light, dimension, linear lines. I started with black and white, then took a deep dive into color. When people see my work, they're curious about my process, which in truth feels a bit like serendipity to me. I never know what I've captured until I upload and sift through the multitude of images, searching for that rare gem. Every time I shoot, something new and unexpected emerges. Perhaps it's the time of day. Perhaps it's the light that I forgot to turn off, seeping through my doorway. Perhaps it's a layer of material that I added to enhance the texture and drama. Whatever it is, I find it exhilarating. The possibilities are truly endless. There's so much extraordinary talent out there, it's hard to choose. I'm especially drawn to light and space artists, such as James Turrell, Peter Alexander, Robert Irwin, Lida Albuquerque, and Larry Bell. There's a beauty and a simplicity to this work that calms me. What they do with color, light, dimension takes my breath away and inspires me. They're all pioneers of sorts, doing something that's never been done before or done quite the same way. Experimentation. Making art is much like writing, although a whole lot messier. You go into a creative zone and follow the ideas as they flow. Some of the ideas have been huge fails, like trying to shoot glow-in-the-dark ping pong balls and even having my husband throw them while I clicked away. The end result looked like nasty amoebas. But the good work I've done, it's all evolved from the same crazy freestyle experimentation. You have an idea, try it. At the moment, I'm actively working on 4 series. The works that brought me here, Time Travel and Glass Houses, are from my psychedelic series. In fact, I currently have a solo show up at Melissa Morgan Fine Art in Palm Desert, and Time Travel is one of the featured works. Psychedelic is all about the intersection of light and color. It's 100% experimentation. I'm fascinated by how colors pass through each other, how they merge and intersect, becoming something else altogether. I work in the dark, sometimes employing black lights, and when I shoot, I never know what I'm going to capture. My camera lens picks up something that isn't visible to the human eye. It all happens in a microsecond. For any of you who have seen the Northern Lights, you know what I'm talking about. What my eyes saw when I went to the Arctic Circle to view the phenomena were simply milky white cloud-like formations. What my camera saw in the night sky were dancing colors, vivid greens, sometimes a little bit of purple, sometimes a bit of red. The colors only appear to us in shades of gray because the light is too faint to be sensed by our color detecting rods and cones in our eyes. Camera sensors don't have that limitation. As I'm shooting, I love to watch the colors merge and transcend the limits of their original hues, creating a world of hallucinogenic abstractions composed of fantastical shapes, reflections, movement, and trippy explosions of color. It's an instant in time, something I can't recreate. I'm literally drawing with color and light. My first series, called Not So Haphazard, is all about linear lines and simplicity, dimension and shadows. I originally called it haphazard, but I'm way too OCD and too much of a perfectionist to settle for something merely done by chance. This series was inspired by the empty wall I mentioned earlier. I wanted something calm, quiet, with lots of negative space and strong lines. They're almost meditative to me. Flower power was inevitable for me. My aunt was an artist, and her greatest passion was painting flowers. As a child, I cherished visits to her home, where she would whisk me off to her crowded studio and show me all her latest creations. The tiny room was bursting with flower-filled canvases, sunflowers, roses, tulips, all so vivid you wanted to pluck them off her canvases and inhale their fragrance. As I began to tackle this series, I knew that I wanted to create a contemporary body of work, abstract, voluptuous, alive with color and calm. I began looking at flowers differently. It wasn't going to be about arranging them in vases for a still life. Instead, I wanted, once again, to experiment. Flower Power has become my Mad Scientist series. Because I love color, I began experimenting with solutions that the flowers drink, altering their natural colors. My laboratory is our laundry room, where I make a giant mess and create unpleasant fumes. The process is probably horribly toxic, but art can be a mad master. Thank you for listening. It's been an honor. And again, thank you to LACP for selecting my work.
Hello again. I would now like to invite our panelists to turn on their cameras. Brian, Bootsy, and Asiya. Hi, everybody again. So it has been such a joy to be able, very selfishly, I have to say, to hear you all talking about your work and sharing your process in this way. And as you were all talking about your very different projects, it occurred to me that what you all share is an interest in making secrets visible and making the unseeable seeable, whether those are people that we look away from or secrets that we're not being told about our own bodies and our own ways of life. And I thought that maybe a question for you all could be about, you know, those issues of visibility and being hidden in plain sight, and how that connects to your photographic practice. I mean, Bootsy, you were talking specifically about secrets, and I was curious about that part in your work. What made you kind of want to make those secrets visible?
I mean, it's something that I grew up with, you know, that whole area.
Mm.
Nobody talks about what's going on. You know, my dad couldn't talk about his work. I couldn't visit him at the federal building without getting a special pass. You know, everything's classified, and it's just the way it was. It's like when you grow up in that, you don't think that it's odd, you know, until you get outside of it and start talking to people, and they're like, what are you, where are you from? I have no clue what you're talking about, you know? So, but for me as an artist, I really, everything I do is about showing the beauty of things that I think other people don't see. And sometimes it is just an object or a place or, you know, a group of images that represent something that I think is unseen or unappreciated. And yeah, this series is taking me a long time to kind of figure it out because it's very different, except for the fact that I do a lot of family work, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And you really are also taking one step away from the family story into this beautiful abstraction that is also so haunting at the same time. Asiya, I was thinking about, you know, the way that you talk about your mother and the way that she plays into this project, of course, is the driving force of this project. And I was curious, you know, you mentioned the greater family context and the social context around this work as well. What are some of the responses that you've been receiving to this project, especially from, you know, family members or from people back home when they see this work?
Well, they were shocked because they didn't even know that she had a bag filled with her old own notebooks. You know, they thought that, you know, because during her life, she will use one and then the pages are like full with her handwritten words and drawings. But they were amazed. They asked me to take a photo of everything I found in that bag, you know, and of course they were proud. I mean,
that's wonderful, because that kind of generates a new kind of a conversation, I can imagine.
yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah. And Brian, I think that idea of a new kind of a conversation is definitely what your work is trying to drive forward. And of course, you also have that nod there to the family connection through your sister's hand coming out of the sky. What were some of the reactions that you've heard for this work?
It was with the homosocial photography, specifically in the reliquaries of the icons. There are a lot of people who are amazed that these photographs even exist. And I just find them at garage sales on eBay, really anywhere possible. And you really have to dig through a lot, but it's just introducing the term homosocial in of itself is a surprise for a lot of people. I thought I made up the term, but it turned out when I Googled it, it already existed. So I was like, okay. But it's really great introducing people to the concept and identifying things that are homosocial that we take for granted. And these images that are like a historical document, and I try to introduce like a narrative to them by putting them in reliquaries and icons. Just really, it reframes how we look at people, how we look at relationships. And I think people are they really respond to that, which is really touching, that even though they may not be homosexual or homosocial, they still see the love there. And that's what's really beautiful about the sentiment, I think. And so I just want to bring it to as many people as possible.
Such a beautiful concluding thought. And as you guys were talking, I was like, we could have called this exhibition No More Secrets or Hidden in Plain Sight. It's really remarkable to see how you guys bring these different approaches toward, you know, how do we see, what do we get to see, what are we allowed to see? And, you know, I think that in different ways, you are all taking permission that was never given to you to make sure that these ideas, lives, relationships will be visible. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for sharing your work with us in this way.